Intro. In the heart of Nigeria, where love, betrayal, and fate intertwine, Eric and Juliet's journey began like the perfect tale. They were inseparable during their university days, growing from mere classmates to devoted lovers. Life had a way of testing them, though their love flourished during their National Youth Service Corps, NYSC. The tides changed as Eric sought greener pastures abroad. His growing success in London, however, came at a high cost: the heart of the woman who had stood by him through thick and thin, Juliet. Eric's sudden shift in behavior left Juliet in agony, but she persevered, focusing on her studies and later building her career as a respected nurse at a renowned private hospital. Fate seemed cruel when Eric's family sought her help, and it was there that she faced the man who had once promised her forever, now a shadow of the person she had loved. As old wounds reopened, secrets emerged, and betrayal ran deep. But life, as Juliet would learn, always had a way of turning things around. Would love be enough to heal the wounds of the past, or would it be too late for Eric to win back the woman who had once given him everything? Watch this interesting story and learn, find out what happened, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. In the heart of Lagos, amidst the bustling streets and the hum of the city, Eric and Juliet's story began. It was the kind of love that people would tell stories about, the kind of love that bloomed in the least expected places, like a flower growing through a crack in the pavement. Their love started not with a grand gesture or a fateful meeting, but with something simpler: a shared connection in the university halls of the University of Lagos. Eric was always the charismatic one. He stood out in a crowd with his easy smile and natural confidence. He wasn't just popular among his peers, but among his professors as well. He was known for his intelligence and ambition, qualities that Juliet admired from the moment she first saw him. They had been course mates, both studying for a degree in business administration. Their first conversations had been about textbooks, deadlines, and group assignments, nothing special, nothing that seemed like it would lead to something more. But Juliet, shy and quiet, had always noticed Eric from afar. He had a certain charm about him that made him seem untouchable, like someone who had the world at his feet. She was more introverted, focusing on her studies, trying to find her own place in the fast-paced world of university life. It wasn't until a group project brought them together that the magic began to unfold. As they spent more time together working on assignments, their connection deepened. Eric was no longer just the charming guy from the front of the class. He became someone she could laugh with, someone she could confide in. And for Eric, Juliet was not just another quiet student in the back of the room. She was someone who understood him, who balanced his ambitious nature with calmness and kindness. They started to spend more time outside of class, walking around the university campus, talking about everything and nothing at all. Their friendship blossomed, becoming something more, something they both hadn't expected but were both quietly happy to embrace. As the weeks passed, they found themselves more and more drawn to each other. What started as a shared study session turned into long late-night walks, deep conversations, and the beginning of a love that neither of them had ever anticipated. One evening, as the sun set over the university campus, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Eric turned to Juliet, his voice soft but steady. "You know," he said, "I never thought I'd meet someone like you here. You've got a calm about you that I really admire." Juliet smiled, her heart beating a little faster. It was in that moment that she realized that Eric was more than just a friend to her. He was someone she cared deeply about, someone she wanted to build a future with. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing day. They began to make plans for their futures, talking about careers, travel, and building a life together after university. The more they shared, the more they realized they were truly meant for each other. It wasn't just a fleeting romance, it was the start of something solid, something real. Their love became the foundation of everything that followed. They began to support each other in ways that were more than just emotional. Eric would lend Juliet his textbooks when she was struggling, helping her with coursework, while Juliet would remind him to slow down when his ambitions started to overtake everything else. They had their disagreements, their moments of doubt, but they always found a way back to each other. They were a team, a unit, inseparable, despite the challenges they faced. But as their university days drew to a close, reality started to creep in. The future they had once envisioned together was now facing an uncertain path. The excitement of their last year was tempered by the looming question of what would happen after graduation. Would they stay in Lagos, or would they have to move away to pursue their dreams? And most pressing of all, what would become of their relationship? Their final semester was a whirlwind of projects, exams, and final goodbyes. But in the midst of it all, Eric and Juliet made a promise to each other: no matter what happened after graduation, they would face it together. They would support each other through whatever came next. After their convocation ceremony, when the last lecture had been delivered and the last exam taken, the two of them sat under the shade of a tree near the university's entrance. The air was warm, and the laughter of fellow graduates filled the atmosphere. But as Juliet looked at Eric, she felt a surge of emotion. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she wanted him by her side. Eric took her hand in his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "I don't know where life will take us, but I know I want to take this journey with you," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Juliet smiled, her heart swelling with love. "I feel the same way," she replied, squeezing his hand. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." And just like that, they sealed their future in that quiet moment, both unaware of the twists and turns life had in store for them. What they didn't know was that their love would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined, as the paths they had dreamed of together began to diverge. But for now, they were content, wrapped in the warmth of their shared promise, ready to face the world as one. And just like that, they sealed their future in that quiet moment, both unaware of the twists and turns life had in store for them. What they didn't know was that their love would soon be tested in ways neither of them could have imagined, as the paths they had dreamed of together began to diverge. But for now, they were content, wrapped in the warmth of their shared promise, ready to face the world as one. As they left the campus grounds, their hands still intertwined, they felt invincible. The future may have been uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure: as long as they had each other, they could conquer anything. As the weeks and months passed after their graduation, the excitement of their shared future began to fade into the background, replaced by the harsh realities of life beyond the university campus. For Eric and Juliet, the world outside their academic bubble was much larger and far more complex than they had imagined. Eric had big dreams. Ambitious dreams. After graduation, he quickly secured a job in Lagos, a bustling metropolis that was the heartbeat of Nigeria's economy. He had always been drawn to the city's opportunities, and now, armed with his degree and an unrelenting drive, he felt the pull to build something for himself. Lagos, with its fast-paced lifestyle and constant hustle, was the perfect place for him to carve out a future. Juliet, on the other hand, found herself back in her hometown. She had always been a bit more grounded, content with the simplicity of family life. She knew the sacrifices her parents had made to send her to university, and she wanted to honor them by coming back home. She enrolled in a nursing program, a career that had long interested her, and before long, she had secured a position at a private hospital in the city. It wasn't the glamorous job she had once dreamed of, but it was steady work, and the fulfillment she felt from helping others was more than enough to keep her going. The distance between them began to grow, not physically at first, but emotionally. Eric, now ensconced in the demands of his job and the opportunities that Lagos had to offer, became increasingly absorbed in his new life. The phone calls that once came regularly, sometimes several times a day, became more infrequent. Juliet tried to fill the void by focusing on her work, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed between them. At first, it was just small things. Eric seemed busier, his responses to her texts were shorter, and their conversations, once filled with shared plans for the future, became more about surface-level topics. How was work? What was happening at the hospital? Did he have time to meet up for the weekend? These were the questions they now exchanged, and every time Juliet asked him about his day, she could hear the distance in his voice. Her visits to Lagos became less frequent. At first, they had been filled with excitement. She would pack her bags and catch the earliest bus to Lagos, eagerly anticipating seeing Eric. Their weekends together would be spent exploring the city, meeting his friends, and dreaming about their future. But now, when Juliet went to visit, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Eric seemed preoccupied, distracted, and distant, almost as if the man she had once known had faded away. His attention was often diverted to his phone, his mind clearly on other things. When she asked him about his work, he would give long, disinterested answers, as if he couldn't wait to get back to whatever was on his screen. It was during one of these visits, when they sat across from each other at a restaurant in Lagos, that Juliet finally voiced her concerns. "Eric, what's happening between us?" she asked, her voice a mixture of hurt and confusion. "We used to talk all the time, we made plans, and now it feels like I'm just someone you're keeping around when you have the time. Why has everything changed?" Eric looked up from his phone, his brow furrowed as though the question had caught him off guard. He sighed, shifting in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm just busy, okay? Things are different now. We're not in school anymore. I have work, responsibilities. You know how it is." Juliet's heart sank. She had always understood that he was ambitious, that he had dreams. But this wasn't just about work, it was about them, about their relationship, and it was slipping through her fingers, like sand in the wind. "But it wasn't like this before. You used to care. You used to make time for us." Eric's gaze flickered briefly with guilt, but he quickly masked it. "It's not that I don't care, Juliet. I do. I don't know how to juggle everything. And maybe I've been selfish. But I don't have the same time I used to, okay?" The word stung, but Juliet held back her tears. She had never been one to demand much, but she knew she deserved more than the silence he was offering her now. She wanted the Eric she had fallen in love with, the Eric who had made promises and plans, the Eric who had made her feel like she was his world. But now, that version of him seemed distant and unreachable. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them deepened. Juliet tried reaching out, but Eric's responses became increasingly short. His calls were fewer and farther apart, and when they did talk, they were filled with awkward pauses. Juliet couldn't help but feel as if she were holding on to something that was slowly slipping away. The phone calls eventually stopped altogether. And with the silence came the uncertainty. Juliet found herself staring at her phone in the middle of the night, wondering if he was thinking of her, wondering if she was just another forgotten chapter in his life. She cried herself to sleep more than once, her mind racing with thoughts of the man she had loved so deeply. What had happened to their dreams? What had happened to their plans? The loneliness crept in. It was the kind of loneliness that wasn't just about physical distance but emotional separation. She had tried to stay strong, focusing on her nursing career and building a future for herself. But it was hard to ignore the empty space in her heart where Eric used to be. In the meantime, Eric was building a new life for himself. His work was going well, and he was beginning to make a name for himself in the industry. But success had a price, and that price was Juliet. He found himself surrounded by new people, new experiences, and a growing sense of detachment from the past. He wasn't intentionally pushing Juliet away, but the more he became immersed in his work in the world of Lagos, the more he started to lose sight of what mattered most. One day, while driving through the busy streets of Lagos, Eric received a message from Juliet. It was brief, but it cut him to the core. "I think it's time we let go. You don't need me anymore." He stared at the message for a long time, his heart heavy. He knew he had hurt her, but he hadn't realized just how much. The realization that she might be moving on without him was a wake-up call he hadn't prepared for. But even then, despite the guilt and regret that gnawed at him, he did nothing. The shift. As the months passed, Juliet's life took on a new rhythm. She poured herself into her nursing career, determined to succeed, to make something of herself. She began to accept that Eric might not be a part of her future, and she tried to embrace the idea of moving on. But the memories lingered, like old wounds that never quite healed. She missed him. She missed their laughter, their conversations, and the plans they had once made together. But slowly, she started to rebuild her life, piece by piece. Eric, however, was caught in his own whirlwind of confusion. The career he had worked so hard for, the success he had dreamed of, had come at a great personal cost. He had pushed the one person who mattered most out of his life, and now, he wasn't sure if he could ever make things right again. But something deep inside him knew he had to try. He had to find a way to fix what he had broken, even if it meant swallowing his pride and admitting he was wrong. But would it be too late? Would Juliet still be there when he finally realized what he had lost? Months passed, and as time flowed, Juliet tried to find solace in her work and the quiet rhythms of her life back in her hometown. It wasn't that she had given up on Eric, far from it. She had always believed that their love was something special, something worth fighting for. But as the months stretched into what felt like years, the love she had once shared with Eric began to feel like a distant dream. Juliet had returned to school after their NYSC, determined to build a future for herself that wasn't dependent on anyone else. Nursing had always been her calling, and she dove into the program with everything she had. It was challenging, but Juliet found joy in the small victories, the praise from her professors, the sense of fulfillment when she helped a patient feel better, and the satisfaction of knowing that her hard work was paying off. It was a quiet, steady life, the kind of life she had always imagined. Yet, no matter how busy she kept herself, she couldn't forget about Eric. Eric had promised her that he would be there, that they would build their lives together. But now, months after their last conversation, after everything that had happened, she couldn't help but wonder if those promises had ever meant anything at all. But even though the hurt still lingered in her heart, Juliet did her best to move on. She focused on her studies, earned her nursing license, and found a job at a private hospital that came highly recommended. The hospital was one of the best in town, and it wasn't long before Juliet's skills and caring nature earned her the position of chief nurse. It was a proud moment for her. She had worked so hard for this, and now she had earned her place in a professional world she had always aspired to. Yet, in the deepest corners of her heart, something was missing. Her colleagues admired her work ethic, and her patients trusted her to provide them with the best care. Juliet had earned a reputation for being someone who would always put others first, who would always go the extra mile. But no matter how much she poured herself into her work, no matter how many people she helped, there was a deep void inside her. The love she once shared with Eric, the man she had imagined spending her life with, felt like a chapter of her life that had been abruptly closed. She didn't know if it could ever be opened again. But the world has a way of bringing people back into your life when you least expect it. Eric's family's crisis. It was an ordinary day at work when Juliet first heard the news. The hospital was buzzing with the usual activity, patients being admitted, nurses running from one ward to the next, doctors making their rounds. Juliet was in the middle of a meeting with a new team of nurses when a message came through on her phone. It was from an old friend, a mutual acquaintance from university, who now worked in Lagos. "Juliet, it's Eric's mother. She's been admitted to the hospital here. She's in critical condition." The message felt like a slap in the face, even though Juliet had known it might eventually come to this. Eric's mother had been in and out of the hospital for years, battling a series of illnesses that no one seemed to be able to cure. Juliet had heard the stories of how doctors were perplexed by her condition, how she had been diagnosed with one ailment after another, only for the treatments to fall short. But hearing that she had been brought into the very hospital where Juliet worked was something she hadn't prepared for. For a moment, Juliet hesitated. The old pain rushed back. The betrayal, the confusion, the heartbreak, all the feelings she had buried deep inside came flooding back to the surface. She had once been a part of Eric's life, a part of his family. But now, here she was, a nurse working to save the life of the very woman who had, in many ways, been the gateway to her past. But Juliet was a professional. No matter the personal history, her responsibility was to her patients. So, she pushed her emotions aside and focused on her duties. She reviewed the case notes quickly and ordered the necessary tests, ensuring that the medical staff followed her directions. The tests were a whirlwind of activity. The team worked tirelessly to stabilize Eric's mother. Juliet, who had already seen her share of medical cases, was shocked by how close her mother-in-law was to slipping away. She did everything she could to ensure that the woman received the best care, but there was an undeniable heaviness in her heart. She couldn't help but wonder how Eric would react to the news, to the fact that his mother was so close to death. Days passed, and Eric's mother's condition fluctuated. There were moments when she seemed to improve, only for things to take a sharp turn for the worse. But Juliet remained focused, determined to save the woman who had once been a part of her life. She administered the necessary medications, ran lab tests, and consulted with specialists. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Eric's mother started to stabilize. Her health slowly improved, and Juliet could see the relief on the faces of the family members who had gathered by her side. But it wasn't the same for Eric. Eric's absence and the shocking news. Despite the gravity of the situation, Eric was nowhere to be found. Juliet's mind raced as she handled the medical care for his mother. How could he not be here when his family needed him most? After all, this was his mother, the woman who had given him life. But as the days passed, Eric remained absent. He didn't visit, didn't check in, and didn't even call to inquire about his mother's condition. And then, when Juliet could no longer contain her frustration, she found out the truth. Eric had been in the city, but not to care for his mother. He had been living his own life, keeping to himself, and had gotten married in the process. The news hit Juliet like a ton of bricks. Eric, the man she had loved, the man she had once thought she would marry, was now married to someone else. He had a wife, a child, and a life that had nothing to do with her. The realization was suffocating, and Juliet couldn't hold back the tears. All of the sacrifices, all of the time she had invested in their relationship, had it all been for nothing? Juliet couldn't understand it. She had helped Eric pay for his school fees, sent him money when he needed it, stood by him through every hardship. And now, this was how he repaid her. By marrying someone else without even a word of explanation. She wanted to scream, to demand an answer, but there was no one to turn to. The man she had once trusted had become a stranger. It felt like she had been discarded without a second thought. But even as she wrestled with the pain, something inside her knew she couldn't let it consume her. She had to keep moving forward, for herself and for her patients. Life had thrown her a curveball, but she wasn't going to let it break her. She wiped away her tears, straightened her back, and continued her work. Her heart still ached for the future that could have been, but in that moment, Juliet realized that she had the strength to move on. She would heal, not just as a nurse, but as a woman who had loved deeply and lost it all. But one thing was clear, Eric had made his choice, and now, it was time for her to make hers. The days following Eric's absence felt like a blur to Juliet. The hospital, once a place of refuge where she could lose herself in the rhythm of her work, had now become a place of deep emotional turmoil. She found herself moving through the hallways with a heavy heart, each step reminding her of the betrayal she had suffered. Despite the steady progress she made in her career, despite the lives she saved and the lives she impacted, there was still a void that no amount of professional success could fill. Eric's name still haunted her thoughts. Every so often, she would catch herself wondering what he was doing, what his life had become. But she quickly pushed these thoughts away, telling herself that she had to let go. After all, he had already moved on. He had built a new life without her, and it was clear that he had no intention of ever coming back. Yet, the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. The unexpected encounter. As Juliet entered the ward, she saw Eric's father, still unconscious, connected to machines that beeped steadily. His face was pale, his body frail. But it was the sight of his mother, who had always been a strong woman, that hit Juliet the hardest. She was awake now, but her eyes were filled with the same sadness that Juliet had seen years ago, the sadness that had filled her own heart when Eric had let her go without explanation. And then, like a ghost emerging from the past, Eric appeared. He was standing by his mother's bedside, his face lined with worry and regret. His eyes, once so full of ambition and life, now seemed hollow, as though he had aged years in the few months since they had last spoken. When Juliet walked into the room, his gaze immediately met hers. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he seemed genuinely concerned. "Juliet," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his words filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. "I am glad you're here." Juliet didn't respond at first. She had no idea what to say to him. The bitterness that had built up inside her over the past few months threatened to spill over, but she swallowed it down. This was not the time for anger. It wasn't the time for confrontation. She glanced over at his mother, who was beginning to stir, and immediately shifted her focus to her patient. She wasn't sure how to feel. Should she offer comfort? Should she be angry? She had given so much of herself to Eric, and now, the man who had once been her world had become someone who stood in front of her, a stranger begging for redemption. Eric took a hesitant step toward her, as though unsure whether to approach. "Juliet, I know I have no right to ask this, but please. Please, help her." Juliet looked at him, her expression unreadable. "She's my patient, Eric. I'm here to help her because that's what I do. But you don't get to come here after everything you've done and act like nothing has happened." Eric's face crumpled, and for a fleeting moment, Juliet saw the vulnerability that had once attracted her to him. "I know I've messed up. I know I've hurt you, but please," he stopped, swallowing hard, before continuing in a voice tinged with regret. "I didn't know what I was doing. I got lost in the world I built for myself. I left you behind, and I regret it every day." Juliet turned away, her emotions swirling. She couldn't understand how Eric could stand there, his voice breaking with guilt, when he had been the one to abandon her without a word. He had broken her heart, left her to pick up the pieces on her own, and now, here he was, asking for forgiveness. But there was something in his eyes, something real, that made her pause. The Eric she had known was still there, buried deep beneath the walls he had built around himself. "Why didn't you call?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why didn't you come back? I waited for you. I gave you everything." "I know, Juliet. I know," Eric said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. When I went to London, I was trying to build a future, but I lost myself in it. I thought I could move on, but I couldn't. And then, when I heard about my mother, when I found out she was here, I couldn't bear the thought of seeing you again, not after what I had done to you." Juliet's heart ached with the weight of his words, but her anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. "You married someone else, Eric. You built a life with another woman, and you didn't even have the decency to tell me why. After everything, I thought you were different. I thought we had something special." "I was wrong, Juliet," Eric whispered, his voice cracking. "I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know how to make up for the hurt I caused you." The silence that followed was heavy, both of them caught in the web of their shared past. Eric knelt down on one knee, his eyes filled with tears. "Please, Juliet. I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I married her for papers. It was never about love. We're divorced now, and am left with nothing. But I want you back. Please, give me a second chance." Juliet's chest tightened. She had been waiting for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, she didn't know how to respond. The woman in her wanted to forgive him, to take him back, to believe that love could conquer all. But the nurse in her, the strong, independent woman who had worked so hard to build a life without him, was hesitant, unsure if she could truly trust him again. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, her voice laced with pain. I don't know if I can forget how you left me without a word, how you betrayed me. But I'll give you one chance, Eric. One chance to prove to me that you are who you say you are now. Eric looked up at her, his face full of hope. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll spend my life making it up to you, if you'll let me. The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile, like glass that could shatter at the slightest touch. Juliet stood in front of him, torn between the love she still felt and the hurt that had shaped her. She didn't know if she could ever trust him again, but part of her believed that people could change, that love could still heal old wounds. She just wasn't sure if she was ready to take the leap. And so, the decision lay before her: could she forgive Eric, the man who had once been her world, or would she walk away for good? The answer wasn't clear yet, but one thing was for sure: her life, her heart, had been forever changed. The days that followed the confrontation between Juliet and Eric were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Juliet found herself torn between the woman she once was, full of hope, trust, and love, and the woman she had become, a woman who had learned to protect her heart, who had built walls around the very emotions she had once so freely offered. Eric's heartfelt apology had opened old wounds, but it also stirred something deep within her, a desire to believe that people could change, that love could still heal the scars of the past. Eric, on the other hand, was a man burdened with regret and a desperate need for redemption. The weight of his actions had crushed him, and though he knew he didn't deserve a second chance, he would do whatever it took to prove to Juliet that he had learned from his mistakes. His love for her had never faded, even through the years of silence, and now, in the midst of his parents' crises, he was ready to face the consequences of his choices. But could Juliet ever truly forgive him? Could she open her heart to him again after everything that had happened? The answers to these questions didn't come easily. The journey ahead would be a test of both their wills, a journey of healing, forgiveness, and rediscovery. But the first steps had been taken. Eric had knelt before Juliet, not as a man pleading for sympathy, but as a man who had finally recognized the depth of his mistakes and was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. A leap of faith. Juliet spent the following days in deep contemplation. The anger, the hurt, the heartbreak, they were still there, lurking beneath the surface. But there was something else too, something soft and vulnerable that she had kept hidden away for so long. It was the part of her that still loved Eric, the part of her that still believed in the future they had once dreamed of. She had built her life around the idea of becoming a successful, independent woman, but deep down, she had always longed for the companionship, the love, and the partnership she had once shared with Eric. Yet, as the days passed, she couldn't help but notice the change in him. He wasn't the man who had left her without a word. He wasn't the man who had shattered her trust. He was someone else, someone who was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild what he had broken. It wasn't an easy decision for Juliet. She wasn't sure if she was ready to let go of the hurt, but at the same time, she didn't want to live in the past. She wanted to move forward. She wanted to give Eric a chance, perhaps not to erase the past, but to build something new. One evening, as the sun set over the Lagos skyline, Juliet stood by her window, looking out over the city that had once been filled with dreams of a future with Eric. Now, it was a city of both memories and possibilities. Her phone buzzed in her hand, and she saw Eric's name on the screen. A simple message appeared: "I'm here, Juliet. I'll be waiting at your parents' house tomorrow. I need you to know I'm serious. I'm ready to make it right." A rush of emotions flooded through her, but instead of pushing him away, she found herself responding, "I'll see you tomorrow." It was a small step, but it was the first step toward healing. Eric's message, simple as it was, showed her that he wasn't giving up, not on her, not on their love, not on the future they had once dreamed of. It wasn't a promise of instant forgiveness, but it was a promise to try, to give their love a second chance. The bride price and reconciliation. The following day, Eric arrived at Juliet's parents' house with a heavy heart and a bouquet of flowers in hand. He was nervous, unsure of what to expect. He had learned from his past mistakes, but this was different. This was about making things right with the woman he had once loved and lost. Juliet's parents had always been kind to him, but he knew that he needed to prove not only to Juliet, but to them as well, that he was a man worthy of their daughter's love. When Juliet saw him standing at the door, looking more vulnerable than she had ever seen him, her heart softened. He was no longer the confident, self-assured man who had taken her for granted. He was a man who had lost everything and was now fighting to regain what he had thrown away. "Eric," she said, her voice steady but warm, "I'm here, and I'm willing to listen. But you have to prove that this time, it's real." Eric nodded, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I will, Juliet. I promise." They sat together, and Eric began to speak, about his regrets, his mistakes, and the lessons he had learned. He explained how his marriage to the white woman had been a mistake born out of desperation, a misguided attempt to gain citizenship. But now, as he sat before Juliet, the truth was clear to him. The love he had for her had never gone away, it had only been buried beneath layers of pride and poor decisions. "Juliet," he continued, "I married her for the wrong reasons. And now, I'm here asking for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I want to make up for all the time I wasted. I want to make it right. Will you give me a second chance?" Juliet looked into his eyes, searching for the truth in them. She saw the man she had once loved, the man who had promised her forever. But more importantly, she saw a man who had grown, who had learned from his past, and who was now willing to do whatever it took to earn her trust again. "I can't promise that everything will be perfect, Eric," she said softly. "But I'll give you a chance. A real chance." And with that, they both began the long road to reconciliation. The next day, Eric returned to Juliet's family home, this time with an offering that held deep cultural significance, the bride price. It was an ancient tradition, one that signified a man's commitment to a woman and her family. Eric had come to understand that his journey to redemption was not just about words, but actions. He had to prove, in the most meaningful way, that he was ready to honor Juliet and her family. Juliet's father accepted the bride price, and with that, the formalities of their engagement were sealed. But the real work had only just begun. The road to rebuilding their relationship would require patience, understanding, and trust, things that had been lost but could still be found. A new beginning. As they stood together in the living room of Juliet's parents' house, surrounded by the warmth of family, Juliet felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. She had been through so much, heartbreak, betrayal, loss, but now, with Eric by her side, she felt as though a new chapter was beginning. A chapter where forgiveness, healing, and love could flourish once again. That evening, Eric took Juliet's hand, his grip steady and sure. "Juliet, I can't change the past, but I can promise you this, I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you. You're my heart, and I'll never take you for granted again." And in that moment, Juliet knew that while the road ahead would not always be easy, it was one they would walk together. The journey of their love was far from over, it had merely evolved, transformed, and been reborn in the fires of hardship and regret. They had both learned, both grown, and now, they were ready to build something new. The past had shaped them, but it would no longer define them. The love that had once been broken was now whole again, and they were ready to embrace their future with open hearts. In this final chapter, Eric and Juliet begin the painful yet hopeful process of rebuilding their relationship. This chapter reflects the themes of redemption, forgiveness, and the power of second chances. While their past has been marred by betrayal, their willingness to face their mistakes and work towards healing gives them the opportunity to rebuild a love that is even stronger than before. Through their journey, they learn that love is not just about perfection, but about resilience and growth. I hope you enjoyed the story. Kindly like, share, subscribe and tell us how you feel in the comment section.